Not every set uses it, but when it does, the consequences can be grave. It's time to go yard with the graveyard.
One of the things, if you just study, Egyptian mythology and stuff, is they were obsessed with death. Death was a really big part of their culture, and so we knew that, okay, we had to somehow incorporate that. And so we knew the graveyard was going to be a component going in. We knew that from the earliest possibility that the graveyard had to matter in some way because death had to matter in some way.
One of the really exciting moments was when we finally figured out what the embalm mechanic was going to be. We knew we wanted to capture this process of mummification because this is a thing that just fascinates people. The canopic jars and the weird hooks that they use to pull people's brains out through their noses and all this creepy, weird, morbid stuff. And it's these are the funerary rites of the Egyptians, and they were really serious about them. They were very Baroque, right?
Temet is the King Tut analog here. That's where we're calling back to. He's supposed to be a centerpiece to an embalm deck. He's helping give your embalm tokens a way to get through in the late game. Certainly you can, of course, play this with other cards that generate tokens if you're more excited about those or have decks with tokens already, but he's supposed to be giving you some late game with all the mummies that you're bringing back from the grave.
Heartpiercer Manticore is a card I love, mainly because I like to imagine two of them together, where one of them throws the other one at your opponent, and then the second one comes back and throws the first one at your opponent, and then the first one comes back and throws the zombie version of the second one at your opponent again. Amonkhet's a fun place.
We wanted the gameplay to match the sense of kind of the mechanics say, you kind of want to march your creatures to their death. There's a resource of creatures being in the graveyard. So you act a little bit differently because, for example, if I have something that I can bring back out, I'm more aggressive with it. It dying or me sacrificing it, that's okay because I know I can bring it back.
When we are looking at graveyard cards and designing cards with mechanics like Embalm, which have the kind of inherent extra power of this is almost just two cards stapled together, there's a kind of careful balancing act between making cards that are satisfying to read and appear powerful when you first see them and cards that play powerfully.
So in most cases, the mechanics here are not such that you're just trying to fill up your graveyard immediately with a bunch of cards. More so, it's we're hoping, and there will be exceptions, of course, but that you'll naturally play your cards. You're gonna only be drawing a spell every other turn or so. Eventually, you run out of things that you can do usefully with your hand, and then it starts becoming, oh, look at, now that I've drawn these extra lands and have more mana, here are all these things that I can start doing with my graveyard that are just kind of freebies in a sense. In many cases, you're getting cards that were already pretty effective on their own rates, and now now that I have 5 mana or 6 mana or whatever here, I can get this creature again effectively for free out of my graveyard by taking my turn to use that card out of my graveyard.
Okay, so here's one of the cool things we did with Embalm is for every single creature, when you embalm it, there's a token. And what we did is every single creature has its own embalm token. So we did parallel art for every single embalm creature. So when you get your embalm creatures, you can go find the matching thing. And when you embalm it, you can get the actual art that matches, that's embalmed of your creature. And then the art team did a cool thing where all the different creatures have a different sort of shape to them so that they look really cool when you embalm them.
The idea for having separate tokens was mine, and I thought to myself, this is a tall order. A token specifically associated with one and no other cards is a lot to ask. And so I went to Jeremy Jarvis, who is the in charge of all the art direction for Magic, and it's like, Jeremy, if you don't think this is a good idea, I'm not going to pursue it because this basically asks a lot of the art team, right? And he really liked the idea.
And so we have both black zombies that live outside the gates and white zombies that live inside. And the reason we did that is we knew 2 blocks back, we had a zombie theme, and that had black and blue zombies. So what we wanted to do was have some overlap. So we gave you more black zombies and more zombie matter cards in black, so you can interconnect with that. But we also gave you something different. Now there's white zombies. So there's blue zombies and black zombies and white zombies, and you can mix and match and make whatever zombie deck you like.
The idea for white mummies evolved somewhat organically. We knew that we could make white zombie-type creatures in this world because the mummification process sanctifies the dead. So the idea of the sanctified dead was sort of the genesis of this idea. And then as the world building evolved for Amonkhet, we wanted to have a sort of creepy sense of unease that why is everything so nice here, but there's something going on under the surface. So we had these very neatly wrapped mummies serving fruit bowls and whatever, but underneath, of course, it's all corruption. They are the undead, and something evil is afoot.
One of the tricky things here was we wanted to have a graveyard component, but just 2 blocks earlier, we had Shadows of Innistrad, which also had a graveyard component. So one of the things we did is we tried to carve out slightly different spaces. So what Shadows did is what I call graveyard as a barometer, which is the graveyard as a place for resource to determine things. So if you look at what Shadows of Innistrad did, is it said, oh, what's in the graveyard? It sort of cared about the contents of the graveyard. But here, this is more about the graveyard as a resource. Like you actually have creatures that are in the graveyard that you can get out, and now they're going to be mummies, and you can fight with them. And so what we wanted to do was make it a very different feel, even though there's an interconnect. I mean, in Standard, there's 2 different blocks in Standard that care about the graveyard, but we want them to care about the graveyard just in different ways.
The idea behind Aftermath originally was that we wanted something to sort of call back to Shadows over Innistrad, to sort of connect with that block and power up some of those cards. And so we thought about the idea, what if we had like split cards that were a sorcery on one side and an instant on the other, and we want, because then they would be 2 card types, just like an artifact creature is an artifact and a creature, gets you to delirium a little faster. If we had a card that was an instant and a sorcery in your graveyard, that would make delirium power up faster. So that was our starting point with this mechanic, and we came upon the idea, well, this is a graveyard set. It's all about bringing things back from the dead. We have the Embalm mechanic. What if there was a spell version of the Embalm mechanic? Kind of like Flashback. So it's a cross between Flashback and split cards. And so we thought we could have a split card where you really wanted to go from one to the other. You want to do one first and then do the other one. So we had one half of the card you can cast from your hand, the other half you can only cast from your graveyard.
What we found is they let us tell very interesting stories. A card like Start to Finish tells a very different story depending on whether you look at just the start card, just the finish card, or them both together, in which case it's quite a sad story, unfortunately.
My favorite of the Aftermath cards are ones where you very much have a setup and then a payoff. So a really good example is Mouth to Feed, where one turn I'm creating a hippo, and then the next turn I'm getting rewarded for having that hippo in the first place. But also you as my opponent have this ability to see the second half coming, and if you can respond, if you can kill off my big creatures, including that hippo, well, then you have a benefit, and that creates a really fun dynamic where we have something to fight over and we have something to set up and then knock down, and I love the way those play out.
We have at our disposal in R&D now a graphic designer who works for us. And that is a luxury that is wonderful. It enables us to do things with Magic cards that we've never been able to do before. And it enables us to communicate with our players in a much more intuitive way, where they can just glance at a thing and immediately know something about it before they've perceived what the art is, before they've read a single word on the card. They know something about that card, and that is tremendously powerful. Liz Leo really knocked it out of the park with the Aftermath frames. This was a huge challenge. I was involved in my own way, trying to make sure it all came off, and she really knocked it out of the park with a radical solution, I think.
One of the big things walking in, like when Sean and I sat down and talked about what exactly does an Egyptian set have to have, and we knew the idea that death had to matter, that I really was the whole time focused on, does death matter enough? Is death ever present here? Or do we have the sense of death really, really matters? And the neat things, I remember watching the slideshow and seeing all the cards, after I know they're in print and they're done, is saying, you know what? Yeah, we did it. Death matters.